The lightsaber could very well be the most iconic weapon in cinema history, and how could it not be? Like the movie that birthed it, it was designed as a novel blend of old-school science fiction with classical adventure and romanticism, appealing to that niche of genre storytelling while also connecting with a more timeless style of staged combat. The result was something, once seen, couldn't be forgotten.
This is the weapon of a Jedi Knight. Not as clumsy or random as a blaster. An elegant weapon for a more civilized age.
Even if the first one-on-one we ever saw with this weapon is kind of laughable compared to later entries in the Star Wars franchise, you can still imagine the spell it must have cast at the time. The striking red and blue glow, the explosive way they'd collide with one another, Ben Burtt's ingenious sound design letting rip with every swing. This fight alone would have been more than enough to make kids go home and make their own makeshift laser swords out of whatever they could find around the house. Thankfully, as the series progressed, the choreography got more ambitious and the lightsaber duel went from a novel concept of its time to a means of heightening the film's story. Instead of two old men touching tips, we had a young student of an ancient art fighting tooth and nail with the fiend who killed his mentor. We feel every shift in this dynamic, with Luke holding his own for a time before getting obliterated by Vader's immersion in the dark side. And the latter's absolute control over the whole fight is made all the more apparent with the biggest twist in blockbuster filmmaking. The next fight, though not quite as intricate in its set pieces, complements the tension and motivations of the trilogy's final act. Plus, we get our fix of seeing Luke kick some ass at the beginning and middle, showing his growth from the last film, and ensuring we don't feel cheated on that front. The two are more evenly matched this time around, but the stakes are much higher, and Luke, for better and worse, has no intention of killing his father.
You are unwise to lower your defenses.
This battle for the very soul of Anakin Skywalker is cloaked in blackness and sterile blues and grays, and made all the more chilling by the demonic glee of the Emperor. And even though for me this is the weakest entry in the original trio, the sequence where Luke lets his rage take the wheel at the end remains one of my favorite dramatic moments in the entire saga. Now, I don't need to tell you there's a huge difference between the lightsaber duels in the prequel trilogy and the first three films. They're much more frenetic and fast-paced, the choreography more stylized and acrobatic than before.
I like that there.
Stunt coordinator Nick Gillard built on the foundations of Peter Diamond and Bob Anderson, incorporating more elements of Japanese kendo sword fighting to illustrate the Jedi at the height of their powers.
Since they had chosen such a short-range weapon, they would have to be so good if they're up against ray guns and lasers. I think it just needed to be much more gritty than it was, much more scary than it was, much faster and much stronger.
The result was a series of fights that sparked their own subculture. As before, the tendency for kids to enact their own duels was there, except now the possibilities were endless. Blue sabers, green sabers, red sabers, yellow sabers, purple sabers, double-bladed sabers, handles modeled after their favorite characters, major and minor. The visual guides and databases went as far as to define individual fighting styles amongst the Jedi. Offensive, defensive, the interconnectivity of the moves to the Force, the world building was off the charts. Years pass and entire communities develop between hobbyists, filmmakers, VFX artists, dancers, and actual sword fighters. Camps and academies train fans around the world how to wield the weapon like a true Jedi or Sith warrior, culminating in elaborate ceremonies that showcase just how skilled some of these people get. And when the technology finally caught up to the demand, the physical props were able to withstand heavy doses of impact, while emitting some pretty spectacular lighting effects. These movies sparked popular interest in a martial art, and yeah, that is what this is. That repurposed techniques that were originated hundreds of years ago from cultures all over the world. And all of this is something that I can genuinely admire as a fan. But what about the movies? As kids, me and my friends loved the likes of Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and Pirates of the Caribbean for their melee-based action sequences. And while we definitely sit down and watch them in their entirety, there was a very clear obsession with these parts of the movies in particular, to the point where we'd just pop in a DVD to watch the centerpiece fights that they had to offer before going back to playing Smash Brothers or Ninja Turtles or whatever the fuck we were playing. As for me, I watched all the behind-the-scenes available to me at the time, coming back to it time and time again as a kid and a teenager. honing in on the stunt coordination and visual technology put into making a lightsaber fight. So, as a production, as something shaped by lots of hard work by lots of different people, I can legitimately appreciate that. And save for a few flashes throughout these 3 movies, that's literally it. Let's get to it. Phantom Menace, the movie with the saber I own in toy form. We get lots of skirmishes between Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and a bunch of battle droids, and at times it's pretty awesome. The same way seeing Rambo or John Matrix mow down dozens of nameless drones with a machine gun is also awesome. The spectacle's there, and it appeals to the testosterone in my body, but there's no real challenge or immediate level of threat. That is, until Darth Maul shows up.
Anakin, drop!
Him and Qui-Gon first fight on Tatooine, and while it does look picturesque at times, it's undercut by too many close-ups, some dust effects that I can unfortunately tell are some kind of overlay footage, and an escape that's so awkwardly shot and so awkwardly edited, it kinda looks like something out of Looney Tunes.
Haha, I'm out of here, Molly boy. Bye.
So overall, we get some middle-of-the-road action throughout the movie, until the Duel of Fates scene, a 3-piece battle that most people are content with. It's plagued with dated blue screening, some of the jumps are either ridiculous-looking or just altogether unnecessary. What the fuck was that? Where's he going? Slightly sideways? Why not just, walk slightly sideways? That was a pointless jump. But in the end, this is still the highlight of an otherwise meh movie, which you, in all likelihood, don't need me to talk about. Ray Park steals the show here, adding both grace and menace to his wacky dual-bladed weapon. Liam Neeson looks stern and focused in his close-ups, and Ewan McGregor, whose acting abilities were really fucked over by this screenplay, by the way, is finally able to show off some admirable intensity, especially when he's forced to fight alone. So all this I say. But what exactly does this all contribute to, narratively speaking? Wow, these 3 are masters of their weapons. The fact that Maul's taking them both on at once means he's a skilled warrior. That's really cool. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, they tag team him, sometimes faking him out. They must have come up with some pretty fine techniques since they met each other. Oh no, they're separated. I guess, really I could, oh God. Oh God, that sucks. The pupil must now defeat what his teacher could not. Cool. Kinda wish the movie itself was about that, or at least built up to this somehow in a way that I gave a shit about. I mean, this is all great choreography, but it just kind of makes me wish that the hour and a half before it was integral to the overall... Wait. It's over? What the hell? No! Come back! Come back, Darth Maul! Come back! So it's an extensive fight with committed performances and physical skill from all involved, but not a whole lot to grip you emotionally. And any important things that do happen just kind of come out of nowhere, with little to no build-up. It's very clearly trying to push the boundaries of what had been done up to that point, which I can respect a little, since in the end someone and something has to do that for the industry. And in this case, it was George Lucas in this first chapter in the prequel trilogy. Unfortunately, with that ambition comes the risk of making something that's not gonna age well. Something that'll be improved upon by future entries. Attack of the Clones is not that. Fuck this fight. For years, I've been of the belief that the prequels get progressively better, and while that still might be true overall, the action in Episode 2, even if it's different from what had been done before, often looks pretty bad. Remember my beefs with the Tatooine fight in the last one? They somehow managed to commit all of those sins more frequently, and in more noticeable ways. They cut between shots that don't flow at all, they don't map out a clear physical relationship between the characters, and when they do, the CG is still there. Stuck right in 2002. I've played PS3 games that look better than this. But I could probably forgive most of those things if it didn't all bleed into the climax so damn much. We lose the 3-way dynamic that made the last one exciting, it all takes place in one spot with minimal use of the environment, and the editing and photography is just awful. If it's not flat and boring, filling time with generic banter out of a staring sequence from Dragon Ball Z, it's disjointed, cut together very sporadically, and framed in a way that makes it seem like the key props and actors weren't even there on the same day of shooting. Okay, I understand that a lot of this was probably to mask the double used for Christopher Lee, who was already ancient by the time this movie came out, but the priority should have been to block out the scene in a way that he would be capable of doing, in a way that played truer to the character he was playing. Speaking of which...
Master Yoda.
Count Dooku.
It is obvious that this contest cannot be decided by our knowledge of the Force, but by our skills with a lightsaber.
Is the novelty of seeing a classic character flipping around and using a lightsaber cool, especially after having only seen him as a Muppet up to this point? Yes, and in the next movie they do a decent job of making it look more believable. That said, this couldn't feel more tacked on, more shoehorned into the backstory of someone who we thought up to this point didn't need to flex his power. At the risk of sounding melodramatic and possessive of this character who I did not create, this does not feel like Yoda. It just doesn't. But let's talk about story. For this fight, there's barely any trajectory in terms of character development or overall urgency to the plot. We open with Anakin being a dumbass as he's been for most of the movie.
No, Anakin, no! No!
Which ultimately causes them to lose, so that's cool. And when things get bad... Well, there you go. I'm laughing. My gut reaction is to laugh. Literally everything that made the Phantom Menace fight work just isn't here. The sweeping scope, the rock-solid acting, and physical commitment, it's just gone. Hell, even if the choreography was any good, the cinematography and cutting just ruins it. It's a shame, because Lee as Dooku, that's a genius casting choice. He's essentially playing Saruman Light, but that's fine for an auxiliary character like this. His quirks and posing were clearly inspired and from a place of affection for his old films, but ultimately all of that potential is offset by a piss-poor action scene. The over-reliance on the technology at the time, the assumption that it just being a lightsaber fight would be enough, it just couldn't be clearer. The very basic fight in the first movie is better than this. It's stilted, sure, but it has the excuse of being the very first one, of being shot before they figured out that the best way to sell these effects was in post, without a rotating pole with reflectors on it. Hell, I've seen fan films that look way better than this. Worse yet, I've seen parodies that look better than this. Well, the circle is now complete. We're now back to the finale from May 2005, my zenith of Jedi action for over a decade. How does it hold up now? Revenge of the Sith, like its two predecessors, isn't being treated the warmest by the cruel mistress that is time, despite being the clear high point of the three. Some of the effects, particularly the digital body doubles, which were popular at the time, get more obvious every time I watch it. And even on that magical day I first saw it in theaters, my friend's dad had this priceless reaction to Dooku's entrance. Yeah, right. There's also some digital shake and panning that these days you just associate with YouTube and daytime crime shows. Overall, though, the movie does a much better job of suggesting the conflict that's happening within Anakin, and those visually driven sequences shine the most for sure. Granted, a lot of the acting's wooden, the screenplay is still riddled with Lucasisms. But from a directing perspective, there's much more vision and finesse put into it. It took two poor movies to get to something solid in this very 2000s genre of blue screen visual effects movies, which have since been improved upon and perfected by dozens of other films like them since. So I'm glad there's still something ultimately watchable that came out of all of this. The first 15 minutes feel more like Star Wars than anything that came before it in this trilogy, establishing scale and camaraderie before giving us a super early rematch with Dooku, which, despite its flaws, rectifies what made the last one such a waste with properly timed banter and visual drama that complements the fight.
Sense great fear in you, Skywalker. You have hate. You have anger. But you don't use them.
But enough stalling. Let's talk about the Battle of the Heroes, the ultimate showdown between good and evil that had been teased as early as 1977. Visually, aesthetically, it's fucking fire. Like literally fire. It's a lava planet. Mustafar's a lava planet. The setting's hellish palette from white hot to steel gray is a fitting stage for the action, and seeing them cause chaos amongst the control room, where Anakin had just slaughtered the remaining baddies in this part of the saga, is a major step up from the Dooku fight in Clones. Hayden Christensen's delivery may be a meme at this point.
This is the end for you, my master.
But I gotta give him props here for his physical effort. When he's acting with his eyes, when he's going in for the kill, he looks the part. And that's tricky to do sometimes. And Ewan McGregor is still motherfucking Ewan McGregor.
Anakin, Chancellor Palpatine is evil! From my point of view, the Jedi are evil! Well, then you are lost!
Both men mesh fluidly in what's hands down the most intricate saber footwork in the series. And I gotta say, even though that flip that Anakin does is 100% unnecessary, when those sabers collide and that music kicks in, it still gets my hair to stand up. It's all intercut with a fight between Yoda and Palpatine that basically amounts to two fantasy characters coming to blows with each other through visual tricks. Which, if you think about it, that's kind of like that first fight, but, you know, actually stimulating and somewhat exciting. I never quite equated those two fights before, but that's essentially what's happening. The cutting edge of effects technology being showcased through a confrontation between two wary, war-ridden characters. That's worth bringing up, I guess. And seeing them tear up that Senate is absolutely cathartic to anyone who couldn't stand this element of the prequels in particular. You can explore politics in Star Wars, but this was just so fucking boring. The old ways of the Republic are being ripped apart, quite literally. In the end, the fight doesn't really go much farther than that, and I can totally empathize with the fact that people really don't feel right seeing Yoda do any of this shit, but as a supporting piece to break up the other confrontation, it does its job well enough. I do have to point out some of the flaws that jumped out at me. Namely, jumping. I keep bringing these up, but it's my least favorite part of any of these prequel fights. At first, it was a better executed version of when Luke would do those hammy flips in the original trilogy. But it eventually became too much, happening in place of a battle charge with none of the deliberateness or physical intimidation of a battle charge. And because of when it was made, it often just looks terrible. Anyway, when the action starts to wrap up, we hear those infamous last couple of lines. We've just watched a bunch of overlong CG set pieces. They were impressive at the time, but it overblows the setting quite a bit, neglecting the fact that the hellscape look is more than enough to sell the moral conflict taking place here. But luckily, they start to hash things out again over the river. Repeat viewers know that the turning point for this seminal character of sci-fi is about to take place. His friend and mentor implores him not to pursue this stupid skirmish any further until Who approved of this shot? This looks like the mock-up of the scene you do before you actually, do the final pass of the effects work. He just vertically shifts upward like Superman, only it's done without wires. They somehow found a way to make it look even more fake than that.
We'll shoot all the stunts as well during those tests. We don't do it well, we just make sure it's going to work. It might be that those become digital stunts, and then those tapes are used as reference.
Looks like a wired one. And, is it? It is on, yeah, there's a rig thing. Doesn't look real.
Look, they already did a decent kickoff of that droid earlier. It's a little shaky, but whatever. Everything's moving around, it works fine. But even before that, there's a respectable enough running start off of the bridge. Damn it, there's absolutely no excuse for it to look like this. And it's such an important part of the fucking fight. So yeah, I'm rewatching this. I get to the part that it's all leading up to, and I'm laughing. It's not entirely fair of me. I can forgive the dated effects. I can map out the significance to the plot, even if it's tactically idiotic, about as much as it's charged from the second movie. Indicating Lord Vader's greatest flaw is just stupidity, I guess. But look, the fact that I'm getting taken out of the experience this much, that's a problem. It's a legitimate problem, and I need to acknowledge that. But hey, this part's still pretty haunting. Those damning, glowing eyes still send me back in time. Ultimately, seeing Revenge of the Sith in theaters is an experience that'll stick with me for as long as I live. I was in 5th grade, got taken out of school early by some family friends to see it opening day, and though I made the stupid decision to play the video game for the Nintendo DS beforehand, thus ruining all of the major plot beats and spoiling an odd line of dialogue here and there, because if there was one thing I appreciated at the time, it was dialogue. Specifically Star Wars dialogue. I was still in complete ecstasy watching this film in all its cutting-edge industrial light and magic glory. I was promised the most lightsaber action I'd get in any Star Wars movie, and on that front, it delivered. Anakin and Obi-Wan fighting on Mustafar was etched into my young subconscious, the conclusion leaving a lasting impression on my still delicate mind. And though I'd come to acknowledge the many flaws found throughout the prequel trilogy as I got older and just became more into cinema in general, I moved right along with the small comfort of knowing that even if I never got another proper Star Wars film, at least it went out on a note that I could respect and appreciate for its visceral display of lightsaber combat, the best I'd see for the rest of my days. That is, until...
Thank you.
Oh my god. Han's dead. Han Solo is dead. One of the most cherished characters from my childhood is fucking gone. But... wait, that means... Christ. How long do the others have? How long do Luke and Leia have? Once they're gone, Man, I don't want to grow up. I already know that people I care about are going to start dropping like flies after a certain point. I know the universe is going to take all I hold dear away from me, but don't take these guys from me. Don't take Star Wars from me. Wait. These two. They're still here. I mean, fuck, I just watched a whole movie about these two. They had no stake in anything, no sense of self, just a knowledge of what came before and how they'd never live up to those standards. But they joined the fight. They met some legends along the way, and in doing so, found their purpose, found their place in this fucking mess. And I want to see them succeed. And this fucker, he's like Anakin, but good. He's a really good actor playing a guy with the universe's worst inferiority complex, idolizing a dude he's never gonna match, and birthed from two of the most legendary heroes who ever lived. That's so cool. That's so different. I want to see where they go next. I still give a shit. Here I am near the end of Star Wars Episode 7, and I still give a shit.
Get him, Finn. That lightsaber. It belongs to me. Come get it.
You get that son of a bitch! No offense to Leia. So yeah, that was me, opening night for The Force Awakens. I jumped in with my girlfriend by my side, feeding off the energy of the crowd with every action scene, every good joke, which even by this point I knew was rare in this franchise. And every little callback to the old movies was met with a cheer that indicated that generations of fans were right there, having a good time at the movies. And yeah, I might have welled up a little bit for some of these moments, but god damn it, by the time we got to this first one-on-one lightsaber fight, that was it. It fucking bulldozed me right in the heart, condensing all of my nostalgia and insecurities about my future into a furious collision of youth searching for their identities. And at the center, the blade of Anakin Skywalker being wielded by two frightened strangers who I've come to care about, coming to blows with the splintered DIY project of Darth Vader's angsty fanboy grandson. And the fight itself complements this story perfectly. These aren't masters of the craft. Hell, they're not even the first students after those masters ceased to exist. We're 2 or 3 generations removed from the last duel we saw in theaters, and it feels like it. Finn's a rogue stormtrooper who's probably at least used one of these things before, but he's still new with this particular kind of weapon. Rey was good at using that staff and has demonstrated some use in the Force. Kylo Ren was trained by Luke motherfucking Skywalker, but it's worth noting he's heavily injured, blinded by rage and, you know, whatever else happens after you push your dad into a chasm of fiery death. For all intents and purposes, these 3, at this particular moment, suck at using these things, which would be a little scary once you've seen what they can do.
For me, the thing that was the most powerful were the lightsaber fights from the original trilogy.
You are beaten. It is useless to resist.
They were incredibly emotional and very powerful. In Force Awakens, we tried to approach it from a point of view of a rougher, more primitive kind of fight as opposed to a more choreographed one.
Watching this duel and listening to the methodology behind it, it was proved to me that sequences like this working relies on 2 things: story and danger. Now, the fundamentals of what I'm talking about here can be found in Chris Stuckmann and EveryFrameAPainting's excellent essays on action filmmaking. So if you want a more in-depth take on what I'm talking about, you should definitely go check those out. But it's these 2 things that I personally find to be what makes the sequel films, thus far, among the best in the series. And at least in some ways, the best. Just compare the content of what I've been saying when I got to each of these duels. Those first 3 movies, I got up my own ass about the poetics, the mythical ramifications behind the fights, more so than the moves they used and the technical hang-ups I had with the fights themselves. And pound for pound, The Empire Strikes Back has my favorite lightsaber duel. It's probably the most recognizable, the most striking one to snag still images from. It has a variety of locations and culminates in a metaphorical seizing of power by the ultimate villain.
No escape. Don't make me destroy you.
Force Awakens has the impossible task of trying to top that fight, made all the more tricky by the fact that a lot of the reason we're invested at this point is because that fight and several others have already taken place in the past. And while it's not going to reshape the way we see one-on-one conflicts like the Luke and Vader duels did, it sort of surpasses them in every way on a technical level. It has the benefit of coming after the learning experience the other movies provided in their making, resulting in something that's, logistically speaking, flawless. Again, as I said, compared to the Forgotten Times of the Republic, these guys suck at using lightsabers. And for a lot of people, that's a fundamental criticism, but step away from the intricacy of the footwork for just a moment. Look at the filmmaking that's taking place in this fight. Look at how cold and chaotic the setting feels, the way the lights reflect off of the combatants' sweaty faces and the pure white snow. The clashing of the blades looks more deadly than it ever has thanks to the sparks, the smoke, and the punchier sound design. And seeing what they do to the environment only heightens that sense of risk. These kids are fighting to the death with laser swords, and when they get hurt, it fucking hurts. The fight is a fraction of the length of the Revenge of the Sith's climax, largely because it doesn't take a whole confrontation for someone to finally get nicked. Each person manages to get in a few slices at the other. Well, like, except Rey, you could argue, but not too dissimilar from Goku and Neo and Superman. Any obstacles she has in this is a matter of doubt and self-belief in the face of danger. Danger, of course, being an opponent who took a fucking bowcaster shot to the fucking chest and killed his own motherfucking dad. But that's not something that's really important to me. Not right now. That's something I'll be more interested in dissecting once this story is over. And it's not over. So, yeah, not yet. What I value here is how tense and savage the blocking is. How it has an immediate narrative link to everything that's happened up to this point. And like all great action sequences, that's what makes you remember a film, as a story, in place of a series of cool moments strung together by stuff that's really, really easy to skip. In fact, just looking for these things showed me just how misplaced people's priorities are when it comes to lightsaber fights, with a lot of compilations and supercuts removing parts of the sequence just to get back to the part where there's swooshing and clashing, which to me is a little sad, because for all the shit I've given something like Phantom Menace, the part where Obi-Wan gets separated from Qui-Gon is handled smoothly and makes the stakes feel higher, if briefly and kind of superficially compared to the other movies. And one of these things just snipped that crap right out of the compilation. The original trilogy's duels stay with me for their pacing, their slow burn sizzle into something explosive. It all happens with a sense of purpose and slows down every now and then for some melodrama that runs with the characters' journeys. They're not perfect. Even in what I still think is the greatest duel in the series, there's a part where Luke just starts swatting at nothing in an attempt to deflect the shit that Vader's throwing at him. It looks goofy as all hell and would never happen in a movie made today with a similar budget. But I can look past that because of the power of the mythology and the storytelling. These new movies bank off of the older ones heavily, but when the action kicks in, modern sensibilities ensure that kind of shit never happens. Alright, so it's gonna feel really weird doing this, seeing as it's not out on home media yet, and there's still people who haven't gotten to it yet. So yeah, if you haven't seen the new Star Wars movie that's currently in theaters, spoiler alert, like, just click the fuck out right now. Doing you a favor, because I don't want to spoil anything. But let's talk about that throne room fight in The Last Jedi. A battle where, even if I wasn't moved to man tears like I was with Force Awakens, just hammers home everything that doesn't hold up about the prequels' fights. Much like the prequels, the throne room fight is locked in a circular setting, the CG that would usually be there replaced by a solid red wall. It's minimal as hell, but it makes the actors pop out more, much like a retro martial arts film or the opening from Avatar. The faceless mini-bosses combine General Grievous's robo-minions with the glowy weapons with the Emperor's royal guards, who were, well, they weren't robo-minions, so there's actually something to fight. By the way, if you want my thoughts on that, it's fine. It's fine, I guess. McGregor's fun, but I really don't care about it. Obi's never in any real danger, and the heavy CG is a little off-putting. Grievous is a creatively designed robot villain, but seeing how they fucked up his character between the Clone Wars cartoon and the film, it really pisses me off to no end. And this is coming from someone who's not, like, super invested in the EU, but I'm sorry, the Tartakovsky character was a lot cooler and a lot scarier. Yeah, he was cocky, yeah, he was, like, try-hard when it came to being a villain, but goddamn, he was intimidating, and he did some cool shit, and his voice was fitting, and then... Count Dooku. So yeah, in my eyes, he's a joke, and I don't fucking care about him. Back to the good shit. Force Awakens' weightier style of combat returns, this time against other weapons and in an environment that's a little cleaner and less elemental. We're reaching full samurai and medieval epic levels of intensity. Rey and Kylo let out primal screams and grunts as they take on this swarm of dudes who want them dead. The kills have more balls than anything I've seen in any space opera, the energy punctuated by sparks that might as well be blood spewing out of a member of the Crazy 88. And while the mere fact that this is a Star Wars movie tells us they're gonna make it out alive, the tension really ramps up at the end. And the final kill is the absolute antithesis to everything about the prequel fights that I can no longer stand. An ending that's sudden, almost comical in how it happens, but it's still satisfying. None of this shit where it's all status quo, evenly matched until it just isn't anymore, and the fight's over. Oh no. It's all earned by the hills and valleys of a struggle, a fight for control over the opponent. Now, Sith comes pretty close with how Anakin just cuts off Dooku's hands, which highlights just how to the point and cold he's become since episode 2, but that nice little beat was already tainted big time by the over-the-top flips and body doubling that happened just before that. This fight is riveting, start to finish, immediately after the death of the Palpatine placeholder and visually symbolic of Rey and Kylo, if for just one sequence, being on the same level. All of it's followed by the payoff of the movie's most fresh and original dynamic between these two sides of the same coin. But I'll leave that where it is until the movie's had a little more time to digest, but for me and for the movie-going public. These new fights, the way they prioritize the characters and story over the surface-level flashiness of being good with a lightsaber, are for me the most natural progression from the original movie's duels. The technology that dazzled me in the 2000s has been improved and refined, reeled in just enough to impress me when those glowing blades fire out of the handle. And it's done in short enough bursts that I never have that oh-so-disappointing moment where I start looking at my watch. Yeah, that happened. I wasn't crazy about that. Showed me just how much time has passed since I first watched those movies. Revenge of the Sith will always be a treasure of a memory for me, but I've been exposed to far better styles and methods of filmmaking to consider it the most engaging source of Jedi action. Even at the time of its release, Roger Ebert, who awarded it 3.5 stars out of 4 despite all its flaws, said this in regards to the saber fights. When they flashed into life with a mighty whizzing thunk in the first Star Wars and whooshed through their deadly parabolas. There's a word I haven't heard since fucking pre-calc. That was exciting, but the thrill is gone. The duelists are so well matched that saber fights go on forever before anyone is wounded, and I'm still not sure how the sabers seem able to shield their bearers from attack. When it comes to great movie sword fights, Liam Neeson and Tim Roth took home the gold medal in Rob Roy, and the lightsaber battles in Episode 3 are more like isometrics. Years ago, I read this, and I thought old Roger was being a little too hoity-toity about the matter, too caught up in the what and the how of the fights. To me, they were awesome, and that's all that mattered. Only now, 10 years after first seeing those two men enact an over-the-top routine set to fire and brimstone, with John Williams' most operatic music blasting and the scenery itself mirroring what should have probably laid hidden just under the hood, do I understand this simple case of less is more. As a kid, my jaw dropped watching Anakin and Obi-Wan doing really impressive spins and kicks and parries, but was I crying? No. What got me, as a 22-year-old lover of movies, was an admirably produced tribute to the genesis of my favorite franchise, taking advantage of the day's most cutting-edge effects while tapping into the universal ideas that made that series work in the first place. It took a timely theme of discovering where you fit into everything, elevated it with the passing of the 20th century's most beloved scoundrel, and finally let it erupt into a spiritual burst of anger, fear, and hope that assured me, with tenderness and confidence, that everything would be okay. That no matter what happens or changes in this wacky world I live in, I'll always have the option to let go, to submerge myself in that optimistic, adventurous side of the human spirit, a side that will be forever emblemized by a galaxy far, far away. Nah, son, the choreography's not nearly as fucking cool. There ain't no twirls. Yeah, Kylo does it a little bit, but he just poses, thinks he's Anakin Skywalker. He's not really good at it. He can do Obi-Ani. I know that's what it's called. If you do the swords professionally, it's called Obi-Ani. There ain't barely no Obi-Ani in fucking weak-ass Star Wars shit. This is fucking bullshit. This ain't nearly as cool. For those of you who are still caught up in that, it's not that you're not entitled to your own opinion. I'll leave you with a message not from Star Wars, but from its most immediate sibling. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate your time. Hope you have a good day. May the Force be with you.